Welcome to the Folio Sightlines blog. I'm Greg Vidras, President of Folio Institutional, and I'm glad to have with us today Bob Veres, a futurist, speaker, author, founder of Inside Information, co-producer of the Insiders Forum, and one of the most influential people in the financial planning profession. Welcome, Bob. I'm delighted to have you with me today.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
So, as we get started here today, for our listeners, Bob has kindly agreed to join me in a conversation to dig deep into three important topics. First is the advisor and the firm of the future, the new client model, and finally we'll spend some time talking about crowdsourcing. Bob, why don't we begin today by talking about what you see the advisor and the firm of the future looking like?
Well, you got so many dimensions to it, but I'll try and give an outline that we can explore things if you want. But I mean, the most obvious thing that I think is being missed by a lot of firms right now is the future client is the millennial. And you would think that would be pretty obvious. You know, the next generation is obviously going to be the next group of clients that eventually the firm is going to have to attract. But I see most firms are still specializing in the baby boomer, aging, decumulating client, and have set up barriers, whether they know it or not, to bringing in the millennial client. So the first issue, I think, is that advisors need to take a good hard look at who that next generation of clients is and figure out how are they different and how do I need to adapt my model in order to attract them.
You see, certainly there's a great emphasis on technology and bringing a more advanced engagement model into firms currently. Do you see that as being a key in adapting to this new client base?
Well, that's one piece of it, obviously. You know, you've got digital natives, they call them. And, you know, if you're at the most basic level, if your website doesn't work on a smartphone, then you're going to look like a pretty stodgy firm to the millennial customer. Getting more deeply into the tech stuff, if your investment process is still being done by hand, then the millennial is going to be turned off by that. And so you've got a variety of things that you need to be able to put into place. One of them, obviously, is the client portal, and I think an expanded client portal is the future, where you put pretty much everybody's whole financial life on the web in a secure vault for them so that it's all in one place, it's all easy, kind of the old binder concept, only a much better version of it. And also, I think, the investment process itself. Now, I do want to get into the way people charge and the service model, but the investment process itself is also, I think, somewhat antiquated. We have very little difference between what consumers know about investing and what professionals know about investing the way we've been doing it. In other words, you know, you index a portfolio, or you could index a portfolio. You might choose a few mutual funds on the side. Well, that information is available to clients as well as advisors. There's very little difference between what they know and what most advisors are doing. And there's going to have to be, I think, another level of advisor alpha, if you will, layered onto it, and that's all going to come from technology. So, you know, one area is, you know, the screening, the SRI screening, which I think is just basic, better fundamental research. And having that available and saying these are the companies that are preparing for a future where increasingly people are concerned about environmental issues, about social issues, and these are the companies that are not. Others are putting together what I call crowdsourced portfolios. Advisors are able to compare notes in these crowdsourcing platforms and talk about to each other and share portfolio ideas, what they're doing, how they're doing it, and gaining greater wisdom from the crowd that's not available to the average consumer. So you've got those areas, and then I'll just touch on the others because I think the others are obvious. The millennial revenue model is going to be monthly fees charged directly out of their account or out of their credit card, rather than the traditional AUM. And why is that? Well, most millennials don't have $2 million to charge out of their portfolio. So if you're charging AUM and they don't have any money saved up in their portfolio, then that's not going to be an ideal way to get paid. and it's also the way they prefer to pay. And the service model, of course, you're going to need to adapt to a more middle market service where things like, do we buy a home? How do we buy the home? How do we get the mortgage? What should the mortgage be? When do we refinance? How do we pay off student loans? More cash flow planning is going to be added to the mix. And, there'll always be wealthy clients, but I think the profession is going to have to go middle market. And the odd thing, the people I talk to who are going middle market with their service model are discovering that it not only appeals to millennials, but also people who are older who have never been wealthy. And those are perfectly good clients if you can leverage yourself, which gets back into technology, which gets back into what I call the cyborg model, where you and technology are working hand in glove to leverage yourself to the utmost possible extent, and that's greater than it ever has been before.
Do you see the need for advisors to be able to support both of those economic models, the traditional AUM, but also being a little more sensitive to the way that millennials expect and want to be charged for services and the types of services they'll need?
Well, I'm a radical bomb thrower. I think the AUM model is dead, and people don't really realize it. The AUM model is fundamentally a lazy way to charge people. When you go to a doctor, they don't say, you go and you say, I need this operation, how much is it going to cost? The doctor says, well, I don't know, how much do you have? No other profession does that. And what it did, the AUM model, which was great when we were first transitioning from commissions to fees, but what the AUM model did was allow people to charge people regardless of how complicated their situation was or how much time and energy they needed. So you just basically said, you have this much money, I'm going to do a division problem, this is how much you'll pay me. A profession has to have clarity about how much work you're going to do and how much you're going to get paid for the amount of work you have to do. And AUM allows you to avoid that calculation. So, a lot of people say, you need to work AUM on an AUM basis with wealthy people and on a fee for service basis with everybody else. I think the wealthy people are not going to stand for that eventually. But there's a transition period. Right now, people say, well, my baby boomer clients are not unhappy with the way I charge. I say, fine, that's fine to keep that model. But don't expect it to work with the millennials and don't expect it to work with the middle market. It won't work with them.
What do you see as the best way that an advisor or advisory firm can both plan for and ultimately make that transition? Because you could certainly see how that change could be perceived to have a significant impact on a firm's revenue model. My suspicion is it may not be as dramatic as they think, but I could certainly understand the reluctance on the part of advisors to undertake that transition.
Yeah, I agree, and it could be messy if you do it wrong. Years ago, I was advising people to go from commissions to fees, and people were saying, well, that's not ever going to work. You can't charge fees for financial planning. And they were saying, and by the way, what would I say to my clients? And I said, well, what are you saying now? And they said, well, what I'm imagining you're asking me to say is, I'm going to stop screwing you now, and I'm going to work honestly with you as opposed to the way I worked before. I think there's a lot to be said for effective messaging, and that was a great example of bad messaging. What I think, first of all, I think advisors need to have on their staff millennial advisors. And then I think the best way to make the transition is to sit down with your millennial advisors and say, I'm going to give you a project. Your project is to create a middle market service model that you and your peers would like to have. And I want to be profitable. And you come back to me and you talk to me about how to leverage this or that. And what they'll do is they'll come back with one of the online investing platform things. Folio FN is one of them. And that makes it much easier to manage portfolios, even small portfolios, and makes a small portfolio profitable. They'll come back with a revenue model that says charge X amount per month for this package, X amount more per month for this other package, and for the deluxe package, much more than that, and that would be equivalent to what the AUM would be for a wealthy client. And that becomes their project. That's not something that, the advisor says, oh, well, I think millennials want this, as a 60-year-old, that's maybe what I would have wanted when I was that age. That's irrelevant. You want younger advisors to figure out what will work with their peers. And younger advisors come to me and they say, I've been working at this firm for 10 years and they're telling me to get out and market. And I say, well, you have this $2 million minimum. I don't know or relate to people who have $2 million, excuse me, in my generation. My network doesn't include those people. So basically what you're telling me to do is go out there and find aging accumulators, and that's not going to work for me. So you want them to create a package that they can sell, and suddenly they become your marketing engine. They become the people who bring them in. So you still have 2 or 3 or 4 different tiers, and your current baby boomer model becomes your upper tier. And these other tiers become a different model that's appropriate for different people. And I think most of your clients are going to feel comfortable with that. I don't think that's going to, if you do it that way, I don't think it's going to disrupt things too much. There are going to be people who are wealthy who are going to say, I want to scale back to tier 2 or something, but I don't think most of them are going to want to give up services in part of the advisory relationship.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I want to go back to something that you mentioned a few minutes ago and just explore it a little bit more. You mentioned the increasing importance around SRI and ESG related data and the inclusion and consideration of those in the investment process, particularly with this sort of emerging millennial investor class. Can you talk a little bit more about the SRI and ESG components as you see them and why they are so important?
Yeah, I think most advisors see the SRI and ESG world as a bunch of pot-smoking hippies. And, there are a few people like that in the SRI world, but for the most part, as I see SRI, it is an additional layer of evaluation of a company. So you've got the financial evaluation. Are they making a profit? Are they being honest with their numbers? What are their prospects? What are they investing in? What's their, you got all that financial stuff. But the financial stuff only goes so far. As we know, Enron looked really good on paper. And so what you need to, I think, the next level of analysis is already being pioneered in the SRI world. Is this firm polluting the environment in third world nations? Are they using effectively slave labor or labor that's not being properly compensated? Is their board a good old boy network? Have they been cited for serious environmental issues, and is that likely to come back to bite them? And when I go to talk at SRI meetings, what I say to the audience is, what you have in this analysis is the missing ingredient to being able to predict whether a firm is going to succeed in the future. I think we all know that people are becoming increasingly sensitive to environmental issues. They're becoming increasingly sensitive to social issues. If you look back 30 years, corporations were routinely dumping things into rivers and things. Now that's unthinkable. I remember when I grew up, we would go to McDonald's and we'd throw everything out the window when we were finished with it. The packaging, the food, whatever we didn't want in the car, we just throw out the window. It's unthinkable now. Things that are routinely done today will become unthinkable in the future. And you want to know which companies are preparing for that future, because that gives you a clue to which companies are going to succeed and certainly avoid nasty downside surprises like having to clean up their own messes, whatever it is. And the inclusion and the diversity issues, every study that's ever been done shows that inclusion and diversity works better than the opposite. And so these are all issues that give you, I think, an important insight into how a company's future is being shaped. And so, I think it's important. I think it's something that's not getting nearly enough attention because people are assuming that people are stuck in the way they look at it as if we're still in the 1960s.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I'm still somewhat surprised the extent to which I even today will hear advisor discussion around having to trade off performance to do good with their investments. And certainly the data that I've seen suggests that that is no longer the case, that it is no longer a question of, do good or do well. You typically now find, I think, that if you put an ESG or SRI lens on an entire portfolio, you could actually enhance performance as well as investing in the companies that, as you say, are planning for the future.
Yeah, we needed some time to get that data. A company that is thinking short term can be more profitable than a company is thinking long term in the short term. And so now that we've got, a decade or two of data, I think suddenly that long-term thinking, the benefits of that long-term thinking are starting to show up in the data.
Bob, it's been great speaking with you today.
Okay, well, I enjoyed it. Thank you.
If you'd like to receive more insightful tips about growing your business, sign up for Folio Institutional's blog at info.folioinstitutional.com/blog. Neither Folio Institutional, its parent, Folio FN Incorporated, or any sister companies have a contractual relationship with inside information. Folio has not compensated Bob Verries or his firm in any way for this interview.